It was almost sunset when the long stretch of highway started to glow in gold and orange. Cars rushed by one after another, their headlights slowly beginning to pierce through the falling dusk. Somewhere along that quiet road, a young girl stood beside a small car that had stopped working out of nowhere. The air around her felt heavy, filled with the sound of passing engines and the occasional chirp of crickets hiding in the grass. She had already tried everything. Her phone battery had died an hour ago. The engine refused to start, and she was too far from any nearby town. She looked around, hoping someone might stop, but every car just zoomed past, too busy or too scared to notice. Her heart started to race, not from panic but from the loneliness of being stranded in the middle of nowhere. She took off her light scarf, tied it to a stick she found by the road, and began waving it up and down, an old-fashioned SOS signal she had seen once in a movie. The fabric caught the wind, fluttering like a tiny flag against the fading sunlight. She hoped anyone would see her. For a moment she thought no one ever would. Meanwhile, not too far away, two men were driving down the same highway. They had just finished a long day filled with interviews and meetings. They were heading toward a local event for a charity foundation, tired but in good spirits. One of them sat behind the wheel, humming along to the music playing quietly on the radio, while the other scrolled through messages on his phone. As they drove past a curve, the man in the passenger seat noticed something strange, a flicker of white waving by the roadside. At first he thought it was just a piece of cloth stuck to a fence. But then as they got closer, he saw the outline of a person. He leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, and said, "Hey, slow down for a second. I think someone's trying to get our attention." The driver eased his foot off the gas. The car slowed, and as the headlights stretched ahead, they both saw her clearly. A young woman standing beside a small car with its hood open, waving a scarf in the air. Without a second thought, they pulled over to the shoulder. The man in the passenger seat stepped out first, his tall frame instantly recognizable to anyone who had ever seen a wrestling ring or a movie screen. But he wasn't thinking about fame at that moment. He was just thinking about someone who needed help. The girl froze for a moment when she saw two large men step out of the car. She didn't recognize them at first. The nightlight was dim, and all she could see were two silhouettes walking toward her. Her first instinct was fear. She had been alone too long to trust anyone easily. But as one of them raised his hand and said in a calm voice, "Hey, you okay? We saw you waving," she felt a small wave of relief. His tone wasn't harsh or pushy. It was kind and steady, the way someone talks when they really care about the answer. She nodded slowly, keeping her distance at first. "My car broke down," she said. "My phone's dead. I've been here for a while, but nobody stopped." The man smiled softly, trying to ease her nerves. "Well, we stopped," he said. "Let's see what we can do." The other man joined them, carrying a small flashlight from the car. He crouched beside the vehicle and opened the hood, peering inside. Steam rose faintly from the engine. "Looks like it overheated," he muttered, glancing at the coolant pipe. "You've been sitting here long?" "Almost 2 hours," she replied quietly. "I didn't know what else to do." "Don't worry," the first man said. "You're not alone anymore." For the first time that evening, she felt her heart slow down. The tension that had built up in her chest started to melt away. She didn't know who they were, but there was something honest about their presence, something that made her believe she was safe. The man with the flashlight asked, "Do you have any water?" She shook her head. "No, I ran out earlier." He walked back to their car and returned with a bottle. "Here, you need to stay hydrated." She hesitated for a moment, then accepted it. The simple act of kindness made her eyes sting with tears she didn't want to show. She had felt invisible for hours, but now, two complete strangers were standing there, not because they had to, but because they chose to. They talked for a while as they waited for the engine to cool down. She told them she was coming back from her part-time job at a cafe in the next town. It was her way of saving up for college. She didn't have family nearby, and this drive was supposed to be routine. She had no idea it would end up like this. Both men listened carefully. They didn't interrupt or rush her story. The one standing beside her nodded occasionally, offering small words of reassurance. "You did the right thing waving for help," he said. Most people would have panicked. When she smiled faintly, he grinned back. "That's better. Keep that smile. It suits you more than worry." The other man checked his phone for a signal and managed to reach roadside assistance. He arranged for a tow truck to come, but it would take at least 30 minutes. He returned and told her the plan. "We'll wait with you until they come," he said firmly. "No way we're leaving you out here alone." She tried to protest, saying, "You really don't have to stay." "I'll be fine," but he shook his head. "Nope, we're staying." "You'd do the same if it were someone else, right?" She didn't know how to respond to that. There was a warmth in his words that made her feel seen, not pitied. As the night deepened, the stars started to appear, scattered across the sky like tiny sparks. The road grew quieter, and for a moment it felt almost peaceful. The three of them stood by the car, sharing small talk to pass the time. They laughed about random things, funny road signs, awkward encounters, and life on the road. At one point, the taller man said, "You know, sometimes the best moments come when plans fall apart." She looked at him curiously. "You really think so?" "Yeah," he replied. "You can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond." Those words stayed with her long after he said them. Eventually, she asked what they were doing on this road so late. The men exchanged a glance and chuckled. "We were supposed to be at a charity dinner an hour ago," one of them said. "But I think this was the real reason we were on this road tonight." She didn't understand what he meant at first, but the sincerity in his tone made her smile. "Thank you," she whispered softly. "You have no idea how much this means." "Hey," he said, patting her shoulder gently. "We all need help sometimes. Don't ever feel bad about asking for it." The sound of a truck engine broke the quiet. The tow truck had finally arrived. The driver jumped out, blinking in surprise when he saw who was standing there. His eyes widened and he almost dropped his clipboard. "Wait, are you—" Both men laughed and waved him off before he could finish. "Yeah, but tonight we're just two guys helping out," one of them said. Together they helped push the small car onto the flatbed, making sure everything was secure. The driver thanked them repeatedly, clearly starstruck, but they just smiled and said it was no big deal. Before leaving, one of the men turned to the girl and asked if she had someone to call. She said her cousin was on the way to pick her up. They nodded in approval. "Good," he said. "Then we'll wait till they get here." "You really don't have to," she began, but he interrupted with a light laugh. "We're not going anywhere until you're safe. That's the deal." She couldn't help but laugh too. In that small moment, the fear that had once gripped her completely disappeared. When her cousin's car finally pulled up, she turned to thank them again. "I don't know how to repay you," she said honestly. The taller man smiled and said, "Just keep being kind. That's enough." As they drove away, she stood by the roadside watching the taillights fade into the distance, still processing everything that had just happened. She didn't even know who they really were until her cousin, wide-eyed, whispered their names in disbelief. Her heart skipped. It suddenly hit her that she had just been rescued by two of the most famous people on the planet, and they hadn't even mentioned it once. That night, as she sat safely at home, she couldn't stop thinking about the way they had stayed calm, patient, and genuine. It wasn't about fame or attention. It was about humanity, the kind that still exists quietly in moments when nobody's recording. And as she drifted to sleep, she realized something beautiful. Sometimes help doesn't come from the people you expect. It comes from those who see your signal and choose to stop when everyone else drives past. The night after everything happened, the girl couldn't stop thinking about what had taken place. It all felt unreal. She kept replaying the moment she saw those two men step out of their car, the way they had spoken gently, stayed beside her, and refused to leave until she was safe. She didn't even take a picture or ask for an autograph. Her mind hadn't worked that way then. She had just been grateful someone cared enough to stop. The next morning, sunlight poured into her small apartment through the blinds. Her car was still at the repair shop, and she had to take a bus to work. As she sat by the window, she overheard two teenagers sitting behind her. They were talking about a post online, a story about The Rock and John Cena helping a stranded girl somewhere outside the city. Her heart skipped. She froze for a moment, listening quietly. One of them said, "I saw it on a fan page. Someone said they helped push a broken car onto a tow truck last night. Man, those guys are legends." The girl turned slightly toward the window, hiding a small smile. She hadn't told anyone yet, but somehow the story had already started to spread. Maybe the tow truck driver had mentioned it. Maybe someone passing by had noticed. Either way, she didn't mind. Deep down, she was just thankful. When she got to work that day, her co-workers were gathered around a small TV behind the counter. The morning show host was reading a short news segment. In a heartwarming act of kindness, Dwayne Johnson and John Cena reportedly stopped to help a stranded driver last night on Highway 19. Sources say the two superstars stayed until she was safe. Both declined to comment. She stood quietly behind the counter holding a tray. Her coworker turned to her and said, "Can you believe that? Celebrities like that just helping random people." She nodded, pretending to be as surprised as everyone else. "Yeah," she said softly. "It's nice to know people still do good things." But inside her heart was full. She remembered how one of them had said, "You'd do the same if it were someone else, right?" Those words had stuck to her like a gentle echo. That night after work, she sat by her window with her phone plugged in. The screen had just turned on after a full charge. She opened her notes app and began typing, not to post but to remember. She wrote down every detail, the way the wind had felt, how her hands had shaken, and how calm their voices were. Writing it out made it feel real again, and by the time she was done, she realized she'd written almost a full page. A few days passed, and life slowly went back to normal. Her car got fixed with the help of a local mechanic who, to her surprise, said his bill had already been taken care of. When she asked how, he smiled and said, "A friend of yours called. Said you were on the highway that night." She knew immediately who it was. A mix of disbelief and gratitude filled her chest. They had gone beyond helping her that night. They'd made sure she didn't have to struggle afterward. She wanted to thank them, but there was no way to reach them. They hadn't given her any contact information. Later that week, while scrolling through her phone during her break, she came across a video from an interview. The Rock was sitting on a talk show couch laughing with the host. The topic eventually shifted to the viral story everyone was talking about. "So did that really happen?" the host asked. The Rock leaned back and smiled faintly. "Yeah, it happened," he said. "But we didn't do anything special. We just saw someone who needed help. That's all?" The audience clapped, but he raised his hand as if to quiet them. "You know," he continued, "people think heroes are the ones on screens or in rings. But real heroism is stopping when everyone else keeps driving." Those words hit her hard. She paused the video, feeling tears gather in her eyes. It wasn't about fame to them. It was about kindness, the kind that expects nothing in return. She decided that day she wanted to do something meaningful with that experience. It wasn't just a random act of luck. It was a reminder. The next weekend, she visited the community center near her neighborhood, where volunteers gathered to hand out meals and clothing to struggling families. She signed up without thinking twice. The coordinator smiled when she said, "I just want to help." Her first day there was simple: folding clothes, handing out bottled water, organizing food boxes. But she felt something deep inside her shift. Every person who walked through those doors reminded her of that night. People trying their best. People just needing someone to stop and notice them. Weeks passed, and she began to find joy in helping others. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she stayed late at the center, helping a woman fill out a job application. The woman looked exhausted but grateful. When they finished, she whispered, "Thank you for staying." The girl smiled gently and said, "It's no problem. Someone once stayed with me too." Meanwhile, across the country, John Cena was scrolling through his messages when he found a letter sent to his charity foundation. It didn't have a name on the return address, only a short note inside. The handwriting was neat but simple. "I just wanted to say thank you. That night on the highway changed how I see the world. Because of you, I've started volunteering. I hope someday I can make someone feel as safe as you made me feel. You reminded me that kindness still exists, and I'll never forget that." He read it twice, then placed it on his desk quietly. He didn't need to reply. Some things didn't need answers. They just needed to be carried forward. Months later, the girl's story resurfaced online. Not because she posted it, but because someone had seen her volunteering and shared how she always stayed late to help. The post said, "This young woman was once helped by The Rock and John Cena. Now she spends every weekend helping others. Circle of kindness complete." The story spread again, but this time it wasn't about celebrities, it was about her. A reporter reached out, wanting to do a small local feature. At first she refused. She didn't want attention, but when the reporter promised to focus on the message instead of the fame, she agreed. During the interview, she said quietly, "That night changed me. I learned that sometimes we wait for big heroes to show up, but real heroes are the ones who stop their car, ask if you're okay, and stay when they could just drive away." The video clip went viral within a day. People commented from all over the world. saying it gave them hope. A teacher shared it in her classroom. A man wrote that it inspired him to help a stranger fix a flat tire. Others said they cried watching it. And once again, The Rock shared it on his own social page, writing, "Proud of you, kid. Keep shining that light." She never expected that. She stared at the screen for a long time, smiling through tears. The kindness that had started with two men on a quiet highway had now reached thousands. The next weekend, she returned to the community center as usual. But this time, more volunteers showed up, people who said they'd seen her story and wanted to help. She didn't know any of them personally, but it didn't matter. They were there for the same reason. As she handed out boxes and shared smiles, she felt something inside her settle. Life wasn't always fair or easy. Cars would still break down, nights would still feel long, but there would always be people willing to stop and help. One evening, after the crowd had gone and the center was quiet, she stepped outside and looked up at the sky. The air was cool, the same kind of night breeze that had brushed against her skin that day on the highway. She whispered softly, "Thank you," not just to them, but to the world for reminding her that compassion was still alive. Somewhere far away, The Rock was sitting on his porch scrolling through messages from fans. One post caught his eye. It was a photo of the girl helping at the community center, surrounded by kids and volunteers. He smiled, showing the post to Cena, who was sitting beside him. "Looks like she's doing just fine," The Rock said. Cena nodded. "Told you she'd turn it into something bigger." They both sat quietly for a moment, watching the sun set beyond the horizon. Fame, success, trophies, all of it seemed small compared to that feeling. Because in the end, it wasn't about being stars on a screen or heroes in a ring. It was about being human, about seeing someone wave for help and deciding that stopping was the only right thing to do. And somewhere in the heart of that girl, now grown stronger and surer, that same belief lived on. When people asked her later why she spent so much time helping strangers, she always smiled and said, "Because once 2 strangers stopped for me, and I'll never forget it." Months had passed since that night on the highway, but the memory of it still lived quietly in the girl's heart. Life had changed for her in ways she never expected. Her story had inspired others, and the small community center where she volunteered had started to grow. More people came each weekend, students, workers, even families who brought food and clothing to donate. It amazed her how a single moment could ripple so far. What began as a desperate SOS signal had somehow turned into a wave of kindness reaching people she had never even met. But deep down, she still felt something unfinished. She wanted to thank the 2 men again, not for helping her car, but for changing how she saw the world. One evening after closing time at the center, she sat alone at one of the wooden tables, flipping through her old phone. She stopped at a photo she'd taken the week after the incident. Her repaired car parked under a streetlight, a simple reminder of survival. Beneath that photo, she had written 3 words, "Never stop helping." She smiled faintly. Those words had become her quiet promise to herself. A few days later, she received an email from a local youth organization that partnered with the community center. They were planning a charity event for underprivileged kids and wanted her to share her story on stage. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't used to speaking publicly. She was just a volunteer, not a celebrity or motivational speaker. But the organizer insisted, saying, "You've lived something real. People need to hear that." So, she agreed. On the day of the event, she stood behind the stage, clutching a small note card with trembling hands. The sound of children laughing filled the air, and colorful banners fluttered in the breeze. She could see families gathering in the seats, waiting. Her heart pounded. She wasn't sure if she could do it. When her name was called, she stepped forward slowly. The microphone felt cold in her hand. She took a deep breath and looked out at the faces in front of her. Then she began. She told them about that night, the broken car, the fear of being alone, the 2 strangers who had stopped when everyone else had driven by. She didn't mention their names, but people in the crowd could tell. She spoke simply with honesty, describing how kindness from strangers had led her to start helping others. Her voice trembled at times, but her words were steady. "I realized that sometimes you don't need to have much to change someone's day. You just have to care enough to stop, even when no one's watching." The audience sat in silence for a moment, then broke into warm applause. She felt her heart swell. It wasn't pride, it was relief. She had finally said what she'd been carrying for months. After the event ended, an older woman came up to her. She had kind eyes and gray hair tied back neatly. She placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder and said, "You reminded me that goodness is contagious. It only takes one act to start it." The girl smiled softly, thanking her. That simple sentence stayed with her long after she went home. Later that night, she sat on her small balcony, sipping tea and scrolling through messages on her phone. Dozens of people from the event had tagged her in posts, thanking her for her speech. One message caught her eye. It came from a youth counselor who worked at a larger foundation. The message said, "We'd love for you to join us for a charity event next month in Los Angeles. We think your story would inspire even more people." She read it twice, unsure if it was real. The event mentioned in the message was a big one, a national fundraiser with many public figures, including both The Rock and John Cena, as special guests. Her heart raced. Was this fate? The thought of meeting them again felt both exciting and terrifying. She didn't know if they'd even remember her, but the chance to thank them properly filled her with courage. Over the next few weeks, she prepared for the trip. Friends from the community center helped her with travel arrangements, cheering her on. "You're representing all of us," one of them said with a grin. "Go make us proud." When the day finally arrived, she boarded the plane with a small bag and a big heart. She kept thinking about what she would say if she actually saw them. 1,000 words floated through her mind, but none felt enough. The event was held at a large indoor arena, filled with lights, banners, and laughter. Celebrities, athletes, and everyday people mingled together, all there for the same purpose, to help raise funds for children in need. She felt small in the crowd, but not out of place. She reminded herself that kindness had no rank. It belonged to everyone equally. As she waited near the backstage area, she caught sight of them, The Rock and John Cena standing near the main stage, greeting volunteers and fans. They looked just as she remembered, strong, confident, but down to earth. For a moment she froze. Her hands grew cold. What if they didn't remember? What if it was awkward? She almost turned away. But then she remembered that night on the highway, the moment they saw her waving for help and stopped without hesitation. If they could stop then, she could step forward now. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward them. When she was close enough, she said quietly, "Excuse me." They turned around, and for a second both of them looked puzzled. Then recognition slowly spread across their faces. "Hey," The Rock said, his expression softening. "Highway 19, right?" She nodded, smiling nervously. "Yeah, that was me." Cena laughed gently. "I told you she'd turn out fine." The three of them shared a warm handshake that turned into a small hug. For a moment it felt like time had folded back. "I never got to thank you properly," she said. "That night changed everything for me. I started volunteering, and now I'm here because of what you did." The Rock looked genuinely moved. "You don't have to thank us," he said. "You did the real work after that night. We just stopped the car." She shook her head, her eyes glistening. "But you showed me what kindness looks like when it's real. And I've tried to carry that forward." Cena smiled softly. "Looks like you have. You inspired a lot of people." They talked for a few more minutes, catching up like old friends. She told them about the community center and the growing number of volunteers. They listened intently, asking questions and offering ideas to help. Before leaving for the stage, The Rock said, "You know, life has a funny way of coming full circle. That night you sent an SOS, and now you're the one answering other people's calls for help." Those words settled deep inside her. She didn't know what to say, so she just smiled. Later, during the event, she sat in the front row as they gave their speeches. Both spoke about unity, compassion, and community, themes that matched her own journey perfectly. When they mentioned her story briefly, the audience applauded, but she felt shy, almost embarrassed. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to keep doing what felt right. After the show, several young people came up to her, saying her story made them want to volunteer too. One teenage boy said, "I used to think no one cared, but now I want to be like that, to stop and help." She looked at him and smiled. That's all it takes, one small choice. That night, back at her hotel room, she stood by the window overlooking the glowing city. She thought about everything, the fear of that lonely night, the strangers who stopped, the chain of kindness that followed. It all began with a moment of helplessness, yet it had turned into something powerful and good. She took out her phone and opened a new note. She typed slowly. When you send an SOS into the world, don't lose hope. Someone will see it. And when it's your turn to answer someone else's, don't hesitate. Just stop, just care. She saved the note and smiled. It wasn't a grand speech or a viral post. It was just a quiet truth she had learned through life. The next morning, as she prepared to leave, she received a message from one of the event organizers. They wanted her to help start a youth program that would connect celebrities with local volunteers, a bridge between influence and action. They said they were inspired by her meeting with The Rock and Cena, her heart filled with emotion. She said yes without thinking twice. As she boarded her plane home, she glanced out the window at the clouds below. Somewhere deep down, she knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning of something even bigger, something built on kindness, courage, and the power of stopping when others don't. And while the world would remember that night as the story of two famous men helping a stranded girl, she would always remember it as the night her life took a new direction. The night she learned that real heroes don't wear capes or stand under spotlights. They drive ordinary cars, stop for strangers, and remind us that goodness is still alive in the world. After returning home from the event in Los Angeles, the girl felt different. Something inside her had shifted. Not in a loud or obvious way, but quietly, like the feeling you get when the first rays of sun touch your face in the morning. She had seen her own journey reflected in others. She had seen how one small act of kindness could grow into something bigger, inspiring people to help each other. The next few weeks were busy. The youth program she had agreed to help launch was in its early stages, but it gave her purpose. She met with organizers, planned schedules, and spoke to young volunteers about the importance of empathy and courage. Every meeting reminded her of that lonely night on the highway, when she had waved a small piece of fabric for help. It felt like everything she was doing now had started from that single moment. One evening, she received a message from a social media account she didn't recognize. At first, she ignored it. Messages often came from strangers, some asking for attention or sharing random thoughts. But curiosity got the better of her and she opened it. It read, "Hey, we've been following your story and your work with the youth program. We wanted to see if you'd be interested in speaking at a larger national event with young people across the country. It's a chance to inspire even more kids." Her heart leapt. She read the message again to make sure she understood. It was an opportunity she had never imagined, not just to volunteer, but to speak to thousands of young people about courage, hope, and kindness. Over the next few days, she prepared her speech carefully. She wanted it to feel real, not polished or rehearsed. She wanted to speak from the heart, like she had on that small stage during the first charity event. She wrote down small notes, moments that had moved her, things she had learned from the people she had met while volunteering, and the lesson she had learned from that night on the highway. Sometimes, the world simply needs someone to stop and care. Finally, the day arrived. The venue was enormous, a convention center packed with children, teens, and volunteers from all over the country. She felt nervous stepping onto the stage. The bright lights made her heart pound, and she could hear a faint hum of excitement from the audience. When the microphone was placed in front of her, she took a deep breath. She began to speak slowly, clearly, telling her story without hesitation. She described the night she was stranded on the highway, her fear and how she felt invisible and alone. Then she spoke about the two men who stopped, the strangers who didn't just drive by, and how that simple act had reminded her that kindness still existed. As she spoke, she noticed the audience's expressions changing. Kids leaned forward wide-eyed, absorbing every word. Some teenagers nodded in recognition, as if remembering times they had felt alone and unseen. A few adults smiled softly, realizing how powerful small gestures could be. After finishing the story, she looked at the crowd and said, "What I want you to remember is this: it doesn't take fame, money, or power to make a difference. All it takes is noticing someone who needs help and being willing to stop. That's where courage lives. That's where kindness starts." The applause was thunderous. People clapped for minutes, some even standing. She felt a mix of relief and gratitude. She had spoken her truth and it had landed. Later, backstage, a coordinator approached her with a small envelope. "These were left for you," she said. Inside, there was a handwritten note from The Rock and John Cena. It said, "We saw what you did today. You've taken what we did for you and made it bigger. You're reminding the world that true strength is in helping others. Keep going." Her eyes filled with tears. She had never expected this acknowledgement, but it meant everything. It wasn't about fame. It was about being recognized for living the lesson she had learned. In the following weeks, her work with the youth program grew. She traveled to small towns, meeting kids who had faced hardships similar to her own. Some had lost family members. Others struggled with loneliness or bullying. She spoke to them, shared her story, and reminded them that courage and hope could be found even in the darkest times. One day, while visiting a rural town, a young boy approached her quietly. He looked no older than 10, holding a small torn backpack. "I just wanted to say, thank you," he said softly. "I didn't think anyone would care, but you helped me believe someone does." She knelt to his level and smiled. "You're welcome," she said gently. "Remember, even small acts can change the world." It wasn't long before the media began noticing her work. Local news stations started running short segments about her programs, her speeches, and her dedication. But she never let it become about her. She always emphasized the kids, the volunteers, and the community she worked with. One morning, she received a surprising phone call. It was from a producer inviting her to participate in a special feature about people spreading kindness in unusual ways. "We want you to talk about your journey," the producer said. "And we'd like to include a segment with the 2 men who inspired your first steps." Her heart skipped. Could she really meet them again on camera? Would it feel natural? She agreed, hoping the moment would honor the spirit of what had started that night. A few days later, the filming began. The Rock and John Cena were already there, casual and approachable, talking with crew members. When they saw her approach, both men's faces lit up with recognition. "Highway 19, The Rock said warmly, extending his hand. She laughed softly. "I won't forget it," she replied, shaking his hand. Cena smiled. "Neither will we. Look at you now, leading all this. That's what we love to see." During the filming, she shared the full story again, this time for cameras, speaking to a wider audience. She talked about the fear she had felt, the patience they had shown, and the lessons she had carried forward. They filmed scenes of her volunteering, interacting with children and speaking at events, showing how one act of kindness could ripple across communities. The Rock and Cena chimed in during the interview, not taking credit but emphasizing the importance of noticing those in need. "It's easy to be busy," The Rock said, "but sometimes the hardest thing to do is the right thing, and it doesn't matter who sees it." Cena added, "You don't need a camera. You don't need recognition. Just being there for someone, that's the real act of courage." The girl watched them speak and felt a deep sense of gratitude. It wasn't just the help that mattered. It was the example they had set. They had shown her what real human decency looked like, and now she was passing that on to others. After filming, they spent time talking quietly off camera. The Rock asked about the program's future plans, offering advice and sharing ideas for connecting volunteers with local resources. Cena spoke about inspiring young people to take leadership roles in their communities. At the end of the day, they walked her to the car. "You're doing incredible work," The Rock said sincerely. "Keep pushing forward even when it feels hard." Cena nodded. "And remember, you don't have to do it alone. You've built a team. Lean on them and keep spreading that light." She thanked them both, feeling a warmth in her chest she could hardly describe. The gestures of encouragement and genuine care meant more than words could express. On the drive home, she reflected on everything that had happened over the past months. From a night of fear and uncertainty to meeting people who believed in her, and now leading programs to help countless others. Her life had transformed. What had started as a desperate wave for help had become a mission to inspire, support, and care for those who might otherwise feel invisible. That evening, she sat at her desk writing in her journal. She wrote about the children she had met, the young volunteers joining her cause, and the messages from people she had never met, saying her story had changed them. She wrote about The Rock and John Cena, not as celebrities, but as examples of what it meant to be human, to see a person in need and choose to act without expecting anything in return. She closed her journal and looked out the window at the quiet city streets. The lights reflected in the glass, shimmering like tiny stars. She whispered to herself, "Kindness is alive, and I'll make sure it keeps going." Somewhere across the country, The Rock and John Cena were talking quietly after the day's shoot. They reflected on the night she had waved her scarf on the highway. "You know," The Rock said, "it wasn't just helping her that night. It was seeing what came after, how she turned it into this." Cena nodded, smiling. "That's the beauty of it. Real acts of kindness grow. You stop for someone and they go on to stop for someone else. It's a chain that never ends. Back at her apartment, she fell asleep with the same thought in her mind. The world could be unpredictable, and people could face dark moments. But as long as there were those willing to stop, to care, to show up, hope would always remain. And for the first time, she realized she didn't just want to survive life. She wanted to change it. One person at a time, one act at a time, she could make the world a place where no one had to feel alone. Months had passed since the national event, and life for the girl had changed in ways she could never have imagined. Her work with young people and volunteers had grown into a small organization, with the goal of connecting children with mentorship, guidance, and simple acts of support. She still remembered that night on the highway when she had felt alone and scared, and she thought about how far she had come since then. She often sat quietly in her office at the community center, looking through photos of her programs. One photo stood out, a group of kids holding up handmade signs that read, "Kindness changes everything." Their smiles were wide and genuine, the kind that reached their eyes, and for a moment, she let herself feel the weight of what had begun with just a simple SOS. It was early spring, and the streets were beginning to fill with the fresh smell of flowers and rain. The city felt alive, full of movement, full of possibility. She had just finished planning a new mentorship program when a familiar name appeared on her phone. She picked up, unsure if it was real. It was the producer from the televised feature. "We're organizing a special community day for kids and families," the voice said warmly. "We'd like you there, and we've spoken with 2 guests who want to attend. They'd like to meet you again." Her heart skipped. She knew instantly who they meant, The Rock and John Cena. The girl took a deep breath. She felt nervous, but she also felt ready. This wasn't about being in the spotlight. It was about the chance to reconnect with the 2 people who had inspired her, and to show how much she had grown. On the day of the community event, she arrived early. The park was already buzzing with activity. Tents were set up with games, food, and art projects for the kids. Volunteers moved quickly, setting up tables and handing out supplies. The girl checked her notes and schedules one last time, making sure everything was in place. A short time later, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. She looked up and immediately recognized them. The Rock and John Cena stepped out, waving and smiling. There was no need for introductions, they already remembered. "Hey." The Rock called warmly, walking over. "You're looking good and busy, I see." She laughed nervously. "Trying my best," she said. "It's a lot of work, but it's worth it." Cena approached with his usual easy smile. "It's amazing to see what you've done since that night on the highway," he said. "You didn't just survive. You've turned it into something bigger than any of us could have imagined." The girl felt a lump in her throat. She hadn't thought of herself as someone who could make a difference. She had just started helping step by step because it felt right. Hearing them say it out loud made her realize the impact of her choices. The day unfolded beautifully. The girl guided kids through different activities, laughing with them and sharing simple life lessons. The Rock and Cena moved among the crowd as well, helping with games, taking photos with children, and quietly giving high fives or encouraging words. One little boy tugged at her sleeve. "Are those the guys who helped you?" he asked, wide-eyed. She smiled and nodded. "Yes, they are. And you know what? They showed me that even a small action can make a huge difference, and now we're all paying it forward." The boy's eyes lit up and he ran off to join a group making thank you cards for volunteers. She watched him go and realized that the ripple effect of one act could spread farther than she had ever imagined. As the sun began to set, the crowd started to gather for the closing ceremony. The girl took the stage to speak one final time. She looked out at the sea of faces, kids, families, volunteers, and 2 familiar figures standing near the front. She took a deep breath and began, "I want to tell you all a story," she said, her voice clear and steady. She shared the story of the night her car broke down, the fear she had felt, and the strangers who had stopped. She spoke about the lesson she had learned, that courage isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's simply choosing to stop and care when no one else does. She talked about her journey since then, how she had started volunteering, met incredible people, and had the chance to help others. She spoke about the mentors she had found, the young people she had inspired, and the volunteers who had become a community. "And today," she said, looking at The Rock and Cena, "I want to say thank you. Not just for helping me that night, but for showing me what it looks like to be human, for showing me that true strength comes from kindness, courage, and compassion. Both men smiled, clearly moved. The crowd applauded loudly, many people wiping away tears. The girl felt a deep warmth in her chest. This wasn't about recognition or fame, it was about connection, about the human spirit being lifted when people choose to care. After the ceremony, she walked through the park, talking with volunteers and families. Kids ran up to her, excitedly showing her artwork, handmade bracelets or thank you cards. Each small act reminded her that she was not alone in her mission, and that the lessons she had learned on that lonely highway were now living in the hearts of others. The Rock pulled her aside. "You know," he said softly, "we didn't do anything special that night. But seeing what came after, that's the real reward. That's why we do it." She nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "It wasn't just you that night," she said. "It was everyone who decided to help after that. Everyone who joins the chain. That's what makes it real." Cena smiled. "Exactly. The world needs people like you. People willing to take a single act and turn it into something bigger. You're the one inspiring the next generation now." The girl realized then that her journey wasn't about a single moment of fear or rescue. It was about the choices she made every day afterward. The way she responded, the way she helped others, the way she shared the message of kindness. It all mattered. As the evening drew to a close, the lights of the park flickered on, illuminating the smiling faces of children and families. Volunteers began to pack up supplies and a quiet calm settled over the space. The girl sat on a bench for a moment, looking around at the scene. She thought about the lonely stretch of highway where it all began. How small and scared she had felt. How the world had seemed indifferent. And she remembered the two strangers who had stopped without hesitation, the strangers who had seen her and chosen to act. It struck her that the world could always feel dark or uncertain. But moments like that, moments of courage, moments of compassion, were what kept hope alive. She had learned to carry that hope forward, and now she saw it reflected in the faces around her. As she walked toward the exit, she felt a tap on her shoulder. It was a young girl from the crowd, no older than 9, holding a small piece of paper. She handed it to her shyly. The girl opened it and read, "Thank you for showing me that I can help too. I will always try to stop for someone who needs it." Her heart swelled. This was why she had started her journey. This was why the fear she had once felt on that dark highway mattered. It had led her to make a difference in someone else's life. Later that night, she sat in her apartment, exhausted but full of purpose. She opened her journal and began writing one final entry for the day. Kindness doesn't need a spotlight. Courage doesn't need recognition. One act can change a life, and that life can change many more. The chain continues, and I will keep it alive. She closed the journal and looked out at the quiet streets below. Somewhere, far away, The Rock and John Cena were probably reflecting on the same thing. That small moments can grow into something extraordinary when we choose to stop, care, and act. The girl smiled to herself. She didn't know how many more lives she could touch or how far her message would travel. She only knew that she had learned something important, that true heroes aren't always the ones we see on screens. Sometimes they're the people who notice someone in need, stay when no one else does, and inspire others to do the same. And with that thought, she went to sleep peaceful and hopeful, knowing that her story, and the chain of kindness it had started, would continue. Because in the end, it wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about humanity. And as long as people stopped to care, hope would always be alive.